Hey there, crew, and hope you're well. Welcome to another update on the ongoing volcanic situation in Iceland. Today is Wednesday, April 24th. I am Geology Professor Shawn Willsey. Thanks for joining me today for this update. We're going to go through some of the latest data and news, look at some interesting projections, and even get to talking a little bit about tourism in Iceland and how the volcanic eruption here is affecting tourism in the area. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks as always to Amanda Joe over in Iceland for providing me with information, details, some of the news updates that helps me put this together. Couldn't do this without her. So as you can see here, the status of the eruption currently is similar to what we've seen over the last few weeks. We have this one main spatter cone vent that is still intermittently erupting lava from its summit crater, and also lava is being pumped out of this crater through an opening or a conduit at the base of the cone, and that is feeding this perched lava channel pond system over here to the south. So there's a nice little webcam view of what's taking place in Iceland right now. So we still have this eruption that began on March 16th, still going on well over a month after it began. So that's what we have so far there. Let's go ahead and look at the latest Met Office update, which was from yesterday, the 23rd. Let's walk through this over a few minutes here and look at some of the information and photos that they put together. So eruption continues. The lava field is becoming thicker close to the barrier east of Grindavik. So we've wondered for a time and speculated about the lava that's coming out of the spatter cone, and the size of the lava flow or pond to the south just didn't look like it was accommodating all of the lava. So many people, myself included, had hypothesized that some of this lava was going into a conduit system, a subsurface system, lava tubes, if you will, and if that was moving into some of the lava flow regions surrounding it. And so we now have some verification that that's actually taken place and that those older flows have accommodated some of the inflation and the thickening of the flow. So the eruption continues from the single vent, continues to extrude and propagate towards the south along open channels, which are clearly visible from the cameras. The lava is also traveling longer distances from the crater through a network of closed tubes, which prevents the lava from cooling by direct contact with the atmosphere. So this is a common way that lava volcanic areas are able to transport lava further away from the vent, is by moving beneath that crusted over surface, which is mostly solidified, and passing just beneath it in a closed lava tube system. Remember, rock is a very good insulator, so that lava can stay molten just a few centimeters or so beneath the surface of that thickened crust. The sector of the lava field which has been propagating towards the south and reached the protective barriers east of Grindavik has been thickening in the past few days, as shown in the images below. So if you look at, let's go to this image first. At this image here, and this is just over a period of, let's see what the days are here. It just says the past few days, but this is looking uphill from the terminus or the end of that southernmost flow that for a while looked like it was going to approach the sea and the coastal road there. And what you can see with this two photo comparison, and they've highlighted it with the yellow box, is you can see the elevation or the surface of the lava flow, and then over the past few days to weeks, that lava flow surface has risen. It's inflated as more lava has been injected below that crusted over surface. That's caused that lava flow to actually rise to a higher topographic level. And that's what you can see there as they kind of go back and forth on the photos. So they have a nice photo there that shows that. There's another one here I'll show you here in a second. Yeah, that image was, yeah, anyway. And then the other image we'll look at here is from a camera and located on top of Hagafelt and is oriented to the south. So that's this one here. So now we're looking down towards Grindavik. Here's the protective berm over here along the margin. And what you can see here, it's a little less obvious here. The best place to see the upward movement of the flow in this two photo kind of time lapse thing, I think the best place to see it is by looking at the berm and you can actually visibly see the lava flow at a higher point here. You can see that little kind of plume right there, but then when after the inflation occurs a few days later, you can see it actually is higher. And even in the foreground here, below, outside the yellow box, you might be able to see that the whole lava surface has risen a little bit. So these lava flows, this is typical behavior of these lava flows, and so it tells us that a significant portion of the lava in that pond or channel system is actually working its way underneath the solidified lava flow surface, injecting itself into pore spaces there. It's found and established pathways through that lava. And then as more lava is injected into it, that's actually pushed the entire surface up. That's an easier pathway for it to go, is uplift and inflation, as opposed to breaking more rock and finding a pathway further to the south. So interesting behavior there, and nice documentation that shows us that those lava flow, that the lava is actually reaching further down slope than we could see on the surface, and these photos bear record of that. So the extrusion rate of lava has been about 3 to 4 cubic meters per second since the beginning of April. And let's see, a couple other things on our update here. So the uplift continues. We'll look at that when we get to the GPS data, indicating that magma accumulates at depth at a stable rate, and the total inflow to the magma storage body or reservoir is greater than the outflow feeding the eruption. So more is coming into the system than is going out, and the GPS is our evidence of that. By using analytical models, it is assessed between 7 to 8 million cubic meters of magma has been recharged to the Spartsi reservoir since the eruption began on March 16th. So even though we've been erupting continuously since March 16th, there's been more inflow than outflow, and so we've managed to put a little over 7 to 8 or so million cubic meters of magma has filled that storage zone underneath Spartsi. In previous events, magma started propagating as dike intrusions from the reservoir at 4 to 5 kilometers depth towards the surface once we reached a threshold of anywhere from 8 to 13 million cubic meters. So we're in the window, or just about to enter the window that we've seen in the past in terms of when this magma leaves the storage zone and starts moving either up to the surface, or it generates or creates some new dike or intrusion in the subsurface. Now, we don't know if that's going to hold true, because we're definitely in a new arena since March 16th. Things have changed. The plumbing system beneath the volcano has likely drastically changed versus what it was back in December and January. So they've got 2 bullet points here. The likelihood for a significant escalation in the eruptive activity continues to increase. And here's like 2 possible scenarios. New eruptive fissures may open in the area between Stora Stogafelt and Hagafelt, and or the current eruptive vent may enlarge because of a sudden increase in magma flow rate. So as more magma works its way into storage and then makes its way towards the surface, that could increase the rate of eruption of lava being extruded from that one spatter corn, or we may see new vents open up in the area. If this happens, very short precursors, if any, are expected. So the idea here is you've got a plumbing system already in place. The magma can follow that plumbing system, make its way to the surface without much seismic activity, and you'd have increased flow out of that storage reservoir because of that. Second point, it's also possible that if more magma starts propagating from the Spartsi reservoir to the Sunnuks crater row, this could happen gradually until a balance between the inflow at depth and the extrusion rate at the surface is reached. So this would be a less dramatic scenario here, that we just start slowly increasing the amount of magma that we're seeing being erupted here at this spatter cone. So that starts to ramp up and increase until it balances the inflow rate at depth. And there's also the possibility a new dike intrusion will result in the opening of additional eruptive vents in other areas. This scenario is considered less likely, but if it happens, longer and more intense precursors, especially seismic activity, is expected to occur. So some nice details given there in the new Met Office update, and some nice photos here that help us supply evidence that the lava flow has thickened and grew vertically since it began back in mid-March. Okay, let's look at the earthquake activity. And there, again, there's not much activity here to speak of over the past 24 hours. Just a few little earthquakes, nothing, no trends, nothing alarming, nothing that's indicative of any sort of magma migration. But of course, we may not see a lot of movement in terms of earthquakes, and when we get some sort of increase in the output from the volcano. We'll just have to wait and see if that goes down that way or not. Looking at the past week, similar sort of trend on the whole Reykjanes Peninsula, little cluster of offshore quakes near the southern tip. Not much to the west of Grindavik, and just a little bit of these tiny, tiny earthquakes near the eruptive site. And then the clusters, the kind of just random clusters we've been seeing off at Fagradalsfjall, probably related to this magma intrusion and the proximity of these very weak rocks over here, faulting and fracturing and breaking and accommodating some of that stress. So not much to speak of from a seismic viewpoint. The GPS data is a little more interesting. If we go to our Spartsi GPS station and look at the uplift that's occurred over the past 3 or so months, we see the February 8th eruption, followed by inflation, the ground moving up. That culminated in the March 16th eruption, when the ground dropped because some of the lava or magma had moved to the surface and fed the eruption. We didn't see much of an upward trend until early April, but since then we've been seeing a pretty steady trend. But what's interesting, and again, it's a small sample size here, so very limited data. We'll have to see if this holds. But if we zoom in on this, notice the last maybe 4 or so data points here. So basically over the last day or a little more than a day, the upward trend seems to have stalled a little bit. And so what does that mean? Too early to say. We've seen this before though, right? We had a nice upward trend happening here, and then we had 3 or 4 data points that were pretty much stalled out, but then it resumed inflation, another little kind of stall here. So if you look at the details in these plots here of showing upward or downward movement, you can pick out trends similar to this one. So we'd have to sustain this for several more days to see that that's actually that's the trend. The most likely outcome moving forward is that this starts to resume this kick upwards. And I think it's indicative of this magma influx is not a steady stream flow. It's a bit episodic. It's a bit of pulses, ebbs and flows a little bit, and that's what we're seeing here with some of the GPS data. That would be my interpretation of that. Looking at any of the other stations, like the Blue Lagoon station, you see that similar trend. The last few seem to be somewhat flatlining a little bit. If we go to Eldvorp, similar sort of thing here, nice upward trend, but then the last few not completely indicative of upward movement or inflation. So the other cool thing we can look at here, I found that this is kind of a neat way to look at it. So if we look at the Spartsi station and we look at it over the entire year. So this is a year's worth of data going all the way back to, well, May of last year, but there was no data. But the data starts here in July when this station goes online. This pink vertical column here, this is a volcanic eruption from Litli Hrútur. So this was over near Fagradalsfjall. So this is off to the east. And then the blue line shows our north-south movement over time. The red line shows our up and down movement. And then the green line down here will show our east-west movement. So this is just taking the GPS data over a calendar year, plotting it up here so we can see the movement in those 3 different directions. And so nothing happening through the fall of 2023 until we get in here to late October, early November, when there was inflation. And that, of course, culminated right here with this intrusion when the magma injected itself from the storage zone underneath Spartsi, moved to the east, and developed this approximately 15-kilometer long dike underneath the Sunnukur crater, older crater series there. And so that's the intrusion. So you can see the ground dropping down because magma moved out of the storage zone. And then magma began to accumulate. The ground was moving to the north, moving also to the west. And then that culminated on December 18th with a volcanic eruption. So another volcanic eruption, this one that lasted about 4 or 5 days. Then inflation resumed until we had another eruption on January 14th, okay, near Hagafeld. Then inflation again resumed until we had the eruption in February 8th. So you can see a little bit of a downturn there and the movement up, down. And then, of course, we had an intrusion on March 2nd. So that was another little blip in the data where magma did not erupt, but instead moved through some subsurface conduit and then stalled. And then they haven't marked it yet here, but this would be the March 16th eruption. So there's another down drop in the data, and then the trend going up here. And so this kind of nicely shows the movement of those GPS points over time, just a different plot that I found kind of helpful. And then you can change it to show, like, 90 days, a month, a week, whatever you want to show. Obviously, looking at a week, not so exciting because the movement is fairly small on this scale here. So good stuff. So there's the GPS data, and related to that, one of our faithful viewers, Bruce Garner, has I think he just loves playing with the data, which is great because we need people like that on the team that are just good at making graphs and stuff. So this is a graph he put together from February 9th up to April 12th or so. So I guess that's about 2 months worth of data. Each one of these colored lines is a different GPS station in the area. So the one we've spent a lot of time looking at is this yellowish one here, but we've looked at some of these others as well. And this just shows the daily up and down movement of each particular station. But what's interesting to note here, especially once we get to the March 16th eruption, so the big down drop event here is the beginning of the March 16th eruption. But since that time, look how closely these GPS stations, for the most part, somewhat mirror each other. When there's uplift at one, you see uplift at the others. Now, it's not always true, but it's generally true. And you can see the overall trend. The yellow one there that's highest, that's the one that we believe is most centrally located over the magma storage zone. That's the Spartsi one. These other ones here are a little bit further away, but nicely shows the uplift. And you can see here from March 16th up until early April, maybe about here, that the uplift rate was fairly slow. Like it wasn't moving up a lot. Like, in fact, it was maybe only moving up about 20 millimeters or so. But then since that time, it's increased quite a bit more so. And so the uplift rate is, close to 35 millimeters since this early April data point here. So definitely an uptick there. Just another way to look at the data, but similar to what we've seen previously. And then the other thing he sent me, this isn't graphic, but this is, let me just walk you through this and see if you can listen and if this makes sense. So I don't really have a graphic to go with this, so I'll just throw that back up for now. So he took the 4 peak heights for the December, January, February, and March eruptions. So remember that, well, maybe I do want to show that now that I'm thinking about it. Let's see. Oh, never mind. Anyway, so he took those, remember that the uplift occurred over, it's similar to what we see here. So we had the uplift, and then we'd always have, we'd have inflation that culminated in eruption, and then, we'd have deflation, and then we would resume inflation and then deflation. And so I'm not showing the other events back in December, but this would show that. And what he did was he took sort of the highest point that preceded the eruption, right here, and then imagine that for the other ones. And it says here he calculated the average height increase between eruptions. Okay, so how much it rose from this point to this point, and calculate a standard deviation for those, and then is using that as just a possible projection as to when how high will this trend need to get another eruption? Now, the tricky thing here is we have an ongoing eruption while we're inflating. So this is, again, uncharted waters, just kind of a different scenario than what we had with these past ones. But given an uplift, he says, of about 3.7 millimeters per day, it leads to a window of about May 21st to May 25th, assuming standard inflow rates, constant magma flow to the surface, and so forth. So making a bunch of assumptions, which is what our models and predictions always lie in. He thinks it'll be probably another good month before we get any sort of either additional vent opening up or a substantial increase. Basically, when will this system become as pressurized as the other systems did, which led to them having eruptions? And he thinks it'll be in about a month from now. So interesting. We'll see if that holds up. But this is the kind of the fun, right? Is just playing with the data and seeing how things look moving forward. Okay, on to some news. A bit of a news story here. Where they talk, this is mainly with Benedict Ofigsen from the Met Office, and talks about basically, we're in uncharted areas. This is a bit of an unusual situation. Usually we've been able to relax while the eruption is going on, but I don't think we can afford to do that now when it starts to reach these limits. So now that we're approaching this 8 or so cubic meters of storage in terms of magma, and that's been the lower limit of what we've seen in the past. And then this is what I kind of found most interesting. We've had various Icelandic officials and others that have pointed towards an eruption off to the east in the Eldvorp system. And he mentions that, he says, the other possibility, of course, is that it might go to Eldvorp, but we think it's highly unlikely. We're not seeing any signs of that. We would always see that much longer in advance. We'd be looking at a few hours or a lot more. So again, if it's going to move to some other location other than the present pathway conduit system that we presently see today, we would see seismic activity. There would be some indication that that magma was going to go to some other place. So that's kind of it for the data and the news. The last part of my update here today, folks, is going to focus a bit on the tourism that's going on there, and the desire amongst people, myself included, to go and see this eruption up close with their own eyes. And this is where we just get into just tricky territory here. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Amanda Jo follows a lot of this and is on more platforms than I am. And being in Iceland, she probably fields and deals with a lot more questions, some of which are very honest and just inquisitive, and some of which are a little more, I guess, accusatory would be the right term, in terms of like, why are we not allowed to do this or that? And so let me just summarize some of the things she sent me here. So there's a big curiosity and desire to go see the volcano. And some people think that the Iceland news, the authorities, the scientists, that there may be, overhyping the dangers that exist there. Because, you look at this, doesn't look that dangerous, right? To some people. I mean, risk is always something that's personalized, right? What is risky behavior to one person may not be to another. And literally on my last update, as we looked at this webcam, we saw two people right near the edge of this flow. I'm not going to give those two people any more notoriety than they already have, but I believe we know who they were and what they were doing. There's some news reports out there. They were not scientists. They were essentially tourist visitors that were venturing into this area. And so, it can look innocuous, and it's almost like I deal with a lot of risky activities in my world. I'm a professional licensed climbing guide. I've been in the past a licensed professional whitewater guide. It's kind of like when everyone gets in the boat for a whitewater rafting trip. If we just go through some fun waves and there's just a little bit of splashing of water and everyone has fun and the boat stays upright, then it's fun and we don't really sense the danger, right? But when the boat flips over and everyone's out of the boat and on their own in whitewater, that's when it gets real, and that's when the risk and the illusion of safety is kind of tossed out the window. And I would contend the same exists here. We look at this now, and there's just very occasional, just lava kind of spattering, but staying in the crater. There's this fairly stagnant, not seemingly non-dynamic lava pond at the base of the cone here, and so it just doesn't look like a very dangerous or hazardous situation. And so what we run into here is a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you don't allow people access to the site, if you say, hey, all tourists, all visitors cannot get up close and personal with this thing, people question why. They want their freedom. They want the ability to make decisions for themselves. And so they're unhappy. On the other end of the spectrum, if you allow full access, if you say, okay, like go for it, like just there's a volcano, just go for it. Well, then people also want, if they get hurt or heaven forbid someone dies or something like that, well then the questions might be, well, why weren't we kept safe? And why didn't you let us know what the dangers were? How come you didn't tell us that the spatter cone could have a collapse and that the lava could overspill, or that this lava pond, which is elevated, it's perched above its surroundings, that it could have a breakout and lava could spill out onto the landscape? And so it's tricky. And people tend to, my experience in this life is that people, when dealing with seemingly dangerous activities, will tend to have overconfidence in their abilities, and they will underestimate the true hazards that exist there. So they will think it's much safer than it is, and they will overestimate their ability to handle that dangerous situation. So one of the questions Amanda Jo got from just people in general, not pointing a finger at anyone, was, is it really dangerous to walk on the new lava flows during an eruption? Basically, well, it's crusted over. And the answer to that is, yeah, it is. Like, this is incredibly, even if this is completely crusted over and cooled and there's not any active incandescent hot lava, this is incredibly dangerous terrain just to navigate. It breaks under your feet. It has a lot of gases when it rose. So some of these are just hardened shells that when you step on them, they collapse down, and they might collapse down a few inches. They might collapse down a lot more than that, like half of a meter or something. And so it's incredibly dangerous and hazardous terrain to just navigate with your own 2 feet anyway. We talked about this perched pond, this perched lava channel, and we've seen overspills and breakouts in the past. We know we have an active tube system that flows beneath this to the south, and lava tubes are also notorious for having breakouts over time. Where the lava can actually come out of some new area as it's pressurized in the subsurface. So the short answer there is it absolutely is dangerous. Another question she got was, are the Icelandic authorities just lying about people being able to fall through the hard lava on top and get burned? If the lava gets hard and cold on top, then it has to be the same way underneath, or it would still be red and hot and we would see it. And that's not true, and you guys know that. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but you guys are my ambassadors. So when you read these or hear these sorts of statements, please try to educate people, educate them in a civil, respectful manner, but see if you can help educate people with and clear up these misconceptions. So I don't think these are coming from necessarily a bad place. I think it's people who don't have all the knowledge about volcanoes and volcanic hazards. And so they're looking at the situation with their knowledge and perspective and thinking that it's safe and it doesn't look like that big of a deal, or they saw someone on the webcam that got out there, and if they could do it, I could do it. And I think that's the kind of misconceptions and behavior and line of thinking that we need to clear up a little bit. And so, yeah, you can fall through. You can break through lava crust. There's actually a crazy story I could tell you real quickly here, probably from the 70s. I can't remember which decade it was, but it was in Hawaii. And there was a scientist from the Hawaii Volcano Observatory, USGS scientist, and they were hiking out to get some data, and they thought they were on solidified crust, but he actually punched through with his leg the overlying crust into molten lava and ended up with some really nasty burns on his leg. So it absolutely can happen. We know that the crust solidifies quickly, and you don't know if that crust you're walking on is hard all the way through or is sitting on top of a lava tube and you only have a few centimeters of solidified crust above it. So just some thoughts there. So yeah, so it's, I mean, Iceland is a country where they don't have large safety rescue crews ready to go. It's usually volunteer groups. They just don't have the manpower and the resources to police and manage hundreds, if not thousands, of people that want to go out there. So right now they're dealing with these decisions. I'm not saying that some of these things might not change going forward. What they're basically trying to do is assess the current risk. They understand people want to see it. They also would like people to witness this as well, but it has to be done in a safe and orderly way. So until this eruption evolves to a situation where it can be observed safely, those restrictions will probably remain in place for some time. So hopefully that helps a little bit as well. One last little comment she had here, just a misconception that's out there, and this is right from her email to me. I keep seeing people saying that the Icelandic news is reporting that the next eruption will be right at Spartsi under the power plant in the Blue Lagoon, and are having full-blown discussions about this. Some are repeating what others tell them because they honestly have no idea on the topic. Others are just fear-mongering. Well, you guys all hopefully know, because I've stressed this, I think, at length, that let's get over there real quick on Google Earth, that even though our magma body is over here, here's our map to put you into context, even though the magma storage zone is over here and the eruption sites are over here, there's nothing that would lead us to believe that an eruption is going to take place under the Blue Lagoon, under the power plant, as we have currently seen this over the past few months. We would need to see earthquakes in this region, and we haven't seen really any earthquakes in this region. I mean, there's been hardly any earthquakes at all right above the magma body. Okay, they've all been in other areas, which tells us that the crust here is quite strong. It's able to withstand some of the stress associated with the magma accumulation. It also would seem to indicate that the pathways that this magma might take to the surface just don't exist here, at least as presently constituted. So there's just no evidence whatsoever that that's going to take place. So hopefully clearing that up a little bit as well. So thanks again for joining me on this update. Remember, as a programming note, my interview with Greg Stock, the Yosemite National Park geologist, we had to reschedule that. He's dealing with an active rockfall event, which was, I guess, sort of ironic because that was one of the things we wanted to talk with him about. So we'll get that rescheduled, but I am planning to do a live stream next week, probably on Tuesday, the 30th of April. That'll be with Myron Cook. Many of you know Myron, who also maintains a very fun and educational and engaging YouTube channel that deals with geology. So we'll hopefully have Myron on together and you guys can interact with him on the live stream. Otherwise, I will get Iceland updates out every few days or so, just depending on the data that comes out and if I feel like there's enough to discuss. So thanks again for joining me on this update. Appreciate your support and patronage of the channel. Make sure you like it and do all those good things. And take care. We'll see you next time.